Let me try it again. Good morning. I know how I need chance. Y'all bow with me. Gracious Heavenly Father, we come asking you to forgive us of our sins, to thank you for the day. Thank you for everything it brings. Lord, be with us these next couple of days. Get us through them. Let everybody remember that this isn't the most important thing in the world, and neither are these bills. Lead, guide, and direct us. Let us do good. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Hello. Shut up. Let me tell you people on the wall, you got about 10 seconds. If you can't get it out in 10 seconds, you're going to hear the bell, and that means you clear the well. All of them ain't going to make it, okay? Mr. Battles.
Since I used my 10 seconds, I'll just say to ask you to favorably consider it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
which number is it, and you're good to
go? Modified structure. It's on page 3, and it's House Bill 727. It is the fireworks bill. We discussed this yesterday. If there's not any questions, I just ask for your favorable consideration.
Have you got an amendment to that?
Yes, I do.
Why don't you tell us what it is?
The amendment is the portion of the bill that takes out the tents, tents that were put in there in an amendment out of the subcommittee. And I am just fine with the amendment.
This bill is going to wander its way over there to the original author of this stupid fireworks bill. Is he okay with that too, Mr. Mullis?
Mr. Mullis, yes, I talked with him yesterday, and he is just fine with it. I said if it didn't happen here, maybe it could happen over there.
Okay, here we are. Let's get the amendment out of the way. I've got amendment AM 410156. Everybody should have it. We got so moved all over. Anybody opposed to that amendment being on the floor? It's on. Let's go next.
Thank you.
Mr. Welch.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have for you 2 bills on page 1 of the
42 bills.
2 bills.
2 bills.
On page 1 at the very bottom is HB 915. This is this will actually consolidate inspections in the child welfare and welfare provider industries. These are inspections not for any violations, but actually just for the contracts and their annual inspections for licensing.
Next.
On page 3 is the HB 699. This is a change in the terms of office and a do-away with the lame duck period at local government levels.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you. Mr. Jaspers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Learned my lesson yesterday. On page 3, House Bill 1004, modified structure. This is a cooperative bill between the clerks of courts and surveyors, creating an e-filing system for plats. On the top of page 4 is the second bill, House Bill 1060. It's our annual or biannual cleanup bill, where we regulate how people carry arms in the state of Georgia.
No questions, thank you. Mr. Hitchens, you got about 25 of them here, don't you?
I got 4 this morning, Mr. Chairman. First one I had up here yesterday, modified open, is just about halfway down in the first section. House Bill 1064, it's a public safety bill, off-duty use of motor vehicles, Department of Public Safety. It's a public convenience, public safety, and officer safety bill.
Next one.
Next one is under modified structure on page 3, about 3/4 of the way down, House Bill 976. This is a state records management bill. It deals specifically with the use of cameras by police agencies, and there's a significant interest in using body cameras now. I had no idea, but the cost of storing them is much greater than the cost of purchasing them. We had an individual from Marietta come to committee, and for the Marietta Police Department, it could cost $250,000 for the first 5 years to store these if we maintain the same records management standard, which is 5 years. Chairman Willard worked with us extensively on this, and it meets all the legal requirements to maintain them 30 months, and that's what this does, is move it to 30 months.
Good bill. Next bill.
House Bill 1036, this deals with eminent domain, and specifically with a pipeline that is proposed to run from Augusta to Jacksonville, Florida. They have applied for eminent domain under the existing state law, and they've been denied by the Commissioner of the Department of Transportation. It's in court now, and what this would do is form a study committee. It would bring back a study committee that was in 1994 that studied it previously, to look at everything that appertains to this endeavor, and get some information from the company that we haven't been able to get previously.
Next one.
The next one is the Returning Heroes Bill. What it does is, for those military people that are, I'm sorry, I get carried away here.
You have that many bills, you've got to get carried away.
It's 991 on the last page, third from the bottom. I call it the Returning Heroes Bill. What this does is those people who serve in the military service of our country in a combat zone have
good bill. Bye. Bye. You're good. You're good. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I have 3 bills before you today. On the
what
third
is it?
page, about
Do
middle.
y'all know that there's more than one day in this session?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I just
Okay.
worked so hard up to this point, making sure they were just perfect for you when they got here.
I'm going to throw up. Okay, go.
Middle of the page, House Bill 920 is a bill that defines what an excluded party would mean, and what we're really aiming at here is a passive investor in nursing home cases. It has the support of both the nursing home industry and the trial lawyers, if you can believe that or not, Mr. Chairman.
I can't imagine anybody agreeing with a trial lawyer.
Bottom of page 3, House Bill 1043 is a bill that will help our hospitals continue to administer flu vaccines on job site visits.
Is that to put up the screen, Bill?
It modifies some of those requirements that are currently on them, Mr. Chairman.
Next one.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, on page 4 under structured, about 3/4 of the page down, House Bill 960 looks to address a problem that we've seen in our state, and I've talked to so many of you about, that deals with when sales and use tax refund requests are made and the impact that has on our local governments.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm here for one bill. On page 4, middle of the page, structured, House Bill 828 provides for an income tax credit to companies that hire recent parolees.
Okay. No questions. Thank you. Mr.
Thank you.
Kidd.
Bill 889, bottom of the first page. Let someone who has 2 funeral homes and 1 crematory advertise that he has a funeral home and crematory.
No. Oh, Ms. Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Representative Kidd, there have been some concerns raised to me that the African American funeral directors were not in support of this bill. Can you speak to that?
They did not see originally they did not see the substitute. When they saw the substitute, they had a call meeting on that Sunday. And when I talked to Ms. Bentley yesterday, she didn't have a problem with it. It is supported by the Georgia Funeral Home Association and the Independent Funeral Home Association, both of whom testified before Mr. Dixon's committee.
No more questions. Thank you. Mr. Tanner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, about a third way down, House Bill 779, unmanned aircraft bill, result of the study committee and a lot of work over the past year to get all parties in agreement, House Bill 779.
I want to hear about all those parties in agreement. You got anything else?
No, sir.
Dadgum. I wished you had 2 or 3. Ms. Clark.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Meadows, ladies and gentlemen. I bring for your consideration House Bill 1037. It's on page 2 under Modified Open, and it's 5th from the top. House Bill 1037 is sponsored by the Georgia Council on Aging for the Protection of Seniors. The Department of Community Health hosts a registry of all certified nurses assistants working in licensed facilities. The registry offers a place to check references and a place to file complaints of abuse or other problems. Certified nurses aides working in private homes are not part of the registry, and these families have no recourse to file a complaint of elder abuse or other serious matters. This would bring those certified nurses aides into the registry that already exists to give them a place to make a complaint or to handle all sorts of other issues.
No questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Werkheiser.
Thank you, Chairman, members of committees. This one is easy to find. Last page, last bill. This is a notification from the EPD to the local governments in case there's a significant leak from a landfill. It has the support, HB 1028, last bill, last page. It provides notification to the local governments if there's significant leak from a landfill. The Rivers Keepers, EPD, ACCG, and all parties are in agreement.
No questions. Got another? Oh, Mr. Cassis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, it's the 5th from the bottom on the first page, HB 864. This bill amends the Move On When Ready Act and only providing for schools that are nonprofits located in the state of Georgia, but that are not regionally accredited, but accredited by an agency that's recognized by the United States Department of Education to be eligible as a school to provide dual enrollment.
No questions.
Thank you.
Chairman to the front, Mr. Epps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 also, Mr. Chairman. The first on page 1, HB 795 by substitute. This is an agency bill from the Governor's Office of Highway Safety. The purpose is to extend the sunset on Joshua's law regarding driver training funds another 3 years. And it also moves the administration of the program from the Department of Driver Services to the Governor's Office of Highway Safety.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you. Next one.
And on the last page under structured rule, House Bill 924, which seeks a sales tax exemption for qualified job training organizations. According to Department of Audits and Accounts, this legislation shows that Goodwill Industries is the only major job training organization that will meet all requirements of the Qualified Job Training Bill. Another concern on exemptions or opening a gate of panacea, but this is highly structured and pretty much confined to the qualifications of the legislation. Goodwill has placed over 27,000 job seekers in the market in 2014 with an average wage of $9.52 an hour. Thank you, sir.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here today again, for House Bill 684, LC 33, 6490, that's on the modified open, down toward the bottom of the first page, probably about 2/3 of the way down. This bill is to try to get more dental hygiene so people can clean teeth out in areas, safety net settings, and get it to our Medicaid and Medicare patients. It is, again, let me reiterate, it is not a scope change at all for the hygienists. These folks are trained. They have CPR training. It is not giving them additional scope. They do it under the rules and regulations set by the dental board, and they do it under the supervision of a Georgia licensed dentist. We passed a bill yesterday, Mr. Chairman, to put $120 million toward rural health in Georgia by using $100 million worth of Georgia tax credit. This goes further to allow that health care to get out to people in Georgia. I think it's extremely important to our rural health to get out there. Ask the committee's favorable consideration to move it forward.
Mr. Ramsey.
I've heard a lot about this bill the last 24 hours. And I'm kind of reading through it quickly here. Is it just limited to certain locations where these services could be provided, right? That's kind of geared towards the indigent population. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. On lines 50, the locations are on line 55 through 58. Safety net settings under D1 is specifically where.
In Peachtree City, for instance, a facility couldn't pop up in the middle of town purely geared towards driving, I guess, paying customers in our community, in my community or a community like yours, to come and in an unsupervised hygienist location.
No, sir. And nowhere in the bill are the hygienists unsupervised. To be clear about that, they're working under general supervision under the rules and regulations of the board, just not direct supervisions in these safety net settings, with a licensed and authorizing dentist. That's correct.
All right. Thank you for clarifying.
Mr. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've gotten some emails from dentists that said that a cleaning without a follow-up examination by a dentist is just half of the process. Is there anything that requires a review of the patient by the dentist?
Well, thank the gentleman for the question. Actually, let me find the exact line for you, sir. I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time putting it, but Chairman Powell, the dentist in their sole discretion can require that they see the patient before the hygienist. This is just allowing the hygienist to do it under general supervision. The dentist does not have to be in the building when the work is being done. So it's all about the dentist supervision. They can require and not authorize the hygienist to see someone until afterwards. They can also recommend, we can't by law tell you have to come see that dentist, but we have in the bill the notice and the requirements on lines 87 through 92 that they need to recommend that they do see a dentist. We do not think this is the end all, and it's completely supervised, but we can't specifically tell them they have to see a particular dentist. State law doesn't allow us to dictate that. But yes, sir, I appreciate the question, and that is taken care of in the legislation.
Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer the representative's question, they cannot have their teeth cleaned more than twice. If they go to a federally funded clinic and they don't see the dentist the first time it's cleaned, they come back to get them cleaned again, they have to see that the dentist has to see them before they can have any more cleanings. You know, this is for our most needy citizens at our free clinics and all, and for our Medicaid children. It comes down to it is, in a perfect world, every child would see a dentist, but they don't, and people would see a dentist, and you can't make them. And a cleaning where a hygienist can teach them about good oral hygiene and talk to them about the fact that they need to see a dentist is better than nothing. And this is what these people are getting now. Nothing.
Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've heard some more about this bill from my dentist, too. And one of the points was this 100-mile limit that is in the bill. And they've told me that there's some sort of federal law that deals with a 45-mile limit in terms of these service provisions. Can you tell me how that was chosen and just,
Yes, sir. And we've actually talked to them about that. I've actually told the Georgia Dental Association agreed with this bill coming out of the Madam Chair's committee in Health and Human Services. Here's the caveat I have, and I would be absolutely willing to have the 45-mile limit. I would absolutely be willing to do that. But I want to just share something with you. They came out of the committee in agreement with this bill. I have that in writing. I've seen it. But they specifically said only this language. And yesterday I was told that the Georgia Dental Association had reversed course, and they're now causing trouble with the legislation. So quite frankly, Chairman Rice, I don't object to going to 45 miles. But I think they're playing the game that if I do that, then they're going to say I've changed the bill and they won't support it anymore. So I'm in a bit of a quandary here. I'm used to dealing, straight up with folks. I don't mind that amendment, but I feel like I'm being gamed a little bit, sir. Just to be honest.
I'm sorry to hear that. Just for the record, this dentist called me long before your meeting with the Dentist Association yesterday. It had nothing to do with the Dentist Association as far as I know.
No, yes, sir. And just to be clear, the agreement on the bill didn't have a mileage limitation in there. I put the mileage limitation to give us an opportunity and make an easy place to adjust that mileage limit to be fair and to be open and honest with the association. So I would hope we would continue. In my 14 years down here, I've always tried to deal with people in good faith, and I continue to do that, sir.
Mr. Dixon.
I think he's already answered my question, which was whether or not the dentists were in support of this, because I've certainly heard from my dentist voicing opposition to it.
Ms. Cooper.
The 100-mile came from the bill that the Senate passed. That's where that was, and the Dental Association did not disagree with it in the things that they suggested to us, and when they agreed to the bill. The other thing is already public health does dentistry, and they have dental hygienists, and there is a much greater, they have one dentist per each of the 18 public health districts in the state of Georgia. They cover a much bigger radius than 100 miles, and they totally work independently in seeing patients across Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, I know this is taking a bit, but if I may, because this goes to my word when I spoke to your committee previously. I represented that the Georgia Dental Association was in support of that bill. They were coming out of Madam Chairman Cooper's committee, and I have a written document. As such, we are not in opposition to the current draft of the bill, but we reserve opposition. Reserve the right to oppose it if there are subsequent alterations. So I have in writing they're not in opposition to the bill that you have before you. If they've changed, I can promise you the bill has not.
No more questions. Mr. Nimmer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, on page 2, second bill down, House Bill 952, I bring before you for your consideration. This is the Georgia Professional Regulation Reform Act in a response to the North Carolina Dental Board case to try to get Georgia in compliance and keep us out of federal court with our licensing boards. And then on page 4, about 3/4 of the way down, House Bill 951 is the sales and use tax bill I have dealing with major sporting events, school supplies, and Energy Star efficient appliances. And again, I mentioned yesterday, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank again Chairman Powell and the Minority Leader Abrams for helping on that bill and the rest on that committee.
No questions. Mr. Nimmer? And Mr. Nimmer?
Sir?
Nothing.
Okay.
Mr. Coomer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think Mr. Nimmer probably wants you to give him a little money since I misspoke names.
I'm happy to help any way I can, Mr. Chairman. I'm coming again to ask for House Bill on modified open under on the second page, House Bill 1072. That's the Georgia National Guard service cancelable loans, and also on House Bill 973 under modified structured on page 3. I brought a new amendment this morning. That's why I was late. Gave that to Mr. Williams this morning, and he has that. It's cleans up that amendment I had yesterday on the misdemeanor language, and also corrects a a sunset error. We had the wrong sunset date on the bill, so the sunset would be January 1st, 2021 instead of 2024.
Okay, there's no questions on it. Let's do that. First thing you need to do is withdraw the amendment from yesterday.
I withdraw my amendment from yesterday.
No opposition to him withdrawing that, is there? Okay. What we're talking about is on your desk now, AM 390159. Have a move. Is there any opposition to that amendment? Okay, it's on.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Strickland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have two for you. First one, House Bill 685 on page 3 towards the top. This bill provides a way for homeowners in an HOA neighborhood to help take over that HOA when it hadn't been properly set up and it's not properly functioning, and also allows owners in condo complex to complete an expansion that's not currently completed under the 7-year rule.
No questions.
And the second one I have again on page 4, House Bill 1073. This is just a cleanup from the State Bar, the Juvenile Justice Code, that deals with what a trial court can do while a case is on appeal.
What was the last one?
1073. It's on page 4. They're modified structured.
No questions.
Thank you.
My favorite, Mr. Blackman.
Oh, boy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 1066 is on page 4 under modified structured. It's put forth the request of Commissioner Bryson. It allows Chief of Staff of the Commissioner to issue warrants for the arrest of an offender who has escaped from the custody of the department. Thank you for your consideration.
You got a question? Mr. Golick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a friendly question, and just out of curiosity, can you tell us about the scenarios that are occurring that would necessitate that?
I'm sorry.
Can you tell us about the scenarios that are occurring that would necessitate the
well,
need
it's my
for
understanding that
a
it would just
staffer to be able to sign that? I would think that the individual has already escaped, and therefore that would, in and of itself,
sense of urgency, yes.
Be a crime, and therefore why would a warrant be necessary?
I don't know that I anticipated such an insightful question.
I don't know where to begin with that. It's all right. I'm just curious about the need for that. You've got an individual who's escaped from the system. That in and of itself shouldn't necessitate a warrant. If that's a separate code section that needs to be addressed, I understand.
I can go back to the author of the bill and ask what
Mr. Powell
that is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it not true that currently the Commissioner of Corrections is the only person that's authorized to sign a warrant in the case of an escape of an inmate?
Yes, sir, it is.
Is it also not possible that he may be tied up on other pressing business, and by allowing his deputy or chief of staff or any other designated official there also given that authority that they can sign that warrant post haste and get on about taking care of business?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Is it also not true that this chairman is also grateful for you to be able to take this bill from me?
I believe so, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Teasley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I asked for two bills today. House Bill 914, which is the second one from the bottom on the first page there. And that is, in my practice as a real estate agent, I've noticed that there's an increasing, third-party solicitors are sending deed solicitations to brand new homeowners, asking them for them to fill out a form and send them a check. But that's something that is already being provided for by that the closing attorney is providing. They will get mailed a check. So House Bill 914 would just require at the top of this solicitation that says this is not a bill, this is a solicitation, so it's a consumer protection. Would you like me to go on my second, or are there any questions?
Second.
Okay. Second one is on page 3. It's fourth from the bottom, House Bill 1031. Currently under Georgia law, a first place finisher in an election cannot call for a recount, even if the recount might help them to avoid a runoff. We've had a couple of cases over the last few years where there have been just by a handful of votes that the first place finisher could have avoided a runoff and did not. So this is an attempt to help local governments be able to avoid the cost of a runoff election.
No questions.
Thank you.
Ms. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you this morning for the second time House Bill 1058, which clarifies some previous law in order to increase the likelihood of testing and proper notification in the case of HIV/AIDS. This is the appropriate public health response to the epidemic of IV drug abuse and the human and economic costs of caring for hepatitis, HIV, and AIDS. It has the support of the Georgia Hospital Association, the Georgia Department of Public Health, the Grady Health Systems, and the HIV/AIDS Committee, not to mention the chairman and vice chairman of the Health Human Services Committee, among others. Any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the committee. This morning I bring to you House Bill 825, located at the midpoint of page number 3, Protecting Military Children Act. The bill simply would provide for the free exchange of information between the Department of DFACS and the Department of Defense in the support of and the benefit of military children and the families thereof.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring for your consideration House Bill 895. It's on the third page, about halfway down. This bill would require finance directors or CFOs of charter schools to complete training so that they're prepared for their responsibilities. And it also would separate the duties of finance directors and school leaders, the principals or directors of those schools.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm here to ask for House Bill 922 on the fourth page, about in the middle under structured rule, House Bill 922. This bill will simply clarify for the Department of Revenue that when companies qualify for the Quality Job Tax Credit Program, that it's done at the parent company tax return level, not the individual subsidiaries that the wholly owned subsidiaries that the parent company might choose to use.
No questions.
Thank you.
Members. Mr. Powell. Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two bills. House Bill 990 is on the fourth page, fourth from the bottom. This is a bill that intends to clarify what we do when we do a tax appeal of ad valorem taxes. Currently under Georgia law, if I appeal an assessment and my rate is reduced, then I am locked in for a period of 3 years. And that was the intention of the law. We've recently gotten several legal opinions that indicate that that may not be the case. If I just file an appeal, whether it's reduced, stays the same. I dropped the appeal, but just by filing the appeal that may trigger the 3-year lock, which was never the intention. So this bill merely says that if I file an appeal and there's an agreement to reduce, even if it's $1, or the assessors voluntarily reduce without any kind of formal hearing, or if there is a hearing in Superior Court or before a hearing officer or before the Board of Equalization, and if there is any reduction at all, then the 3-year lock applies, but otherwise not. House Bill 1014, if there are no questions, is an exemption for the donation of real property for conservation use. This statute's already on the books. We came in last year as part of an oversight of all of the current exemptions and put a sunset in for 1 year, and we put in a $30 million cap. We are now extending the sunset in this bill and putting in some metrics as far as some reporting requirements as to how many easements, how much the cost to the state is, so that we can keep track of this in a better way.
No questions. Mr. Rice.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside Chairman Epps' bill, House Bill 795.
Mr. T. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick bills. I'd like to once again ask for House Bill 868. It's on the 3rd page, about the middle down. That's the State Games Commission. We're under zero budgeting. We're going to eliminate the commission. Also, another bill, HB 12, which is on modified structure, the second one down. It's the Stolen Valor Bill. It's one that you signed on to, Mr. Chairman. What we're trying to do is to stop people from posing as veterans and also from claiming awards that they don't have. And I'd also like to put my name by HB 951 and 952, Mr. Nimmer's bills.
Mr. Dixon.
Put my name beside House Bills 825 and 895, both dealing with students.
Mr. A. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for House Bill 499. This is the one that allows for enhanced safety in school zones by allowing use of speed detection cameras in the school zones. I think yesterday most of the concerns had been answered by some of the questions that was posed yesterday. I'd also like to ask for, put my name beside 1066, Mr. Blackman's bill, and I'm so gracious to him, Mr. Kidd's bill 889, and of course Mr. Jaspers's bill 1060 on Second Amendment rights.
Mr. Peake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bring before you HB 722. It's on the last page under structured rule. It's the medical cannabis bill. Maybe easier to tell you what's not in the bill. There's no cultivation for medical cannabis in this bill at all. That's been removed. There's no change in the THC limit from what was passed in HB 1 by this body last spring. It does add 6 medical conditions to the low THC oil registry. It also provides protection from manufacturers who want to ship across state lines. We cleaned up some language related to the clinical trials, and it also adds some DUI language at the request of GBI and the Prosecuting Attorney's Council that sets a per se standard for driving under the influence of marijuana.
Ms. Dempsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 4, third from the top, House Bill 1070 was brought forward by Director Bobby Cagle from the Department of Family and Children's Services. This will allow, under 2 very specific instances, for them to open up child sealed agency records before placing a child. 2 very specific concerns dealing basically when the biological parent of an adopted child is the subject of a new Child Protective Services referral, or when the adoptive parents of a child are being considered as a placement resource for a child or children in DFACS custody. This will help with the successful and careful placement of Georgia's children.
Ms. Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for HB 793, just basically sets a consistent state policy when defining fraternal benefit organizations.
Mr. Earhart.
Put my name by 734, the space bill, if you would, please.
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Page 2, near the top, House Bill 1027. All it does is make clear that people can file electronically with our courts across the state with all their pleadings. Same thing our federal courts have been doing for a while. I have one other, if there's no questions, Mr. Chairman.
No questions. Go.
I'm sorry.
Go.
House Bill on the last page, House Bill 766. That's Ms. Beskin's bill on homestead exemption. She had a substitute, I believe, she brought to you, and I appreciated her working out that language. I think it also has some of Mr. Knight's veterans language in it too.
So, Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr.
I just heard
Chairman.
your name mentioned in that bill that your stuff was in 766.
That's Ms. Beskin's bill, her homestead bill. I think that middle part's your veterans language.
Yes, sir. I think we've cleared up the concerns from the members, and we have a substitute.
Okay. Ms. Powell. Miss Powell. Ms. Cooper.
Mr. Chairman, in the bottom of page 3, I'd like to ask for Representative Kelly's House Bill 1043. That's the vaccine protocol agreement. Makes it easier to have flu, things on college campuses and also. And I know that Representative Price is not near as funny as Representative Jaspers, but I can tell you I'd like to ask for House Bill 1058, and it's really nice to have somebody that will carry HIV and AIDS and sexual disease bills besides myself. Thank you.
She's had 23 bills. She's had 23 bills, apparently, and she's a freshman. Okay, let's go. I've lost control. Mr. Setzler. Mr. Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of Chairman Stevens, middle of the first page, HB 513, that's an anti-SLAPP statute. It's an improvement to an existing code we've got. This was brought for the Motion Picture Association, but also affects our First Amendment rights, and would ask your strong consideration for HB 513. Also, Mr. Chairman, on page 3, I'd like to put my name by the Georgia Space Flight Act 734 and Representative Tanner's HB 779. That is a pared down version of a UAV drone bill that has had tremendous amount of work in vetting, and it's been reduced down to the essentials, and it's a great bill ready to move.
Mr. Earhart, you...
Representative Williams, because his machine's still not working.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Williams.
It's my buddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to let him continue to hit his button. I do get called. Kind of feel like Ben Carson, but
I'm going to try not to say anything.
All right, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put my name beside HB 825, HB 828, and the space bill, HB 734.
Mr. Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the last page, I'd like to put my name beside House Bill 1060, Representative Jasper's bill, and House Bill 1028, Representative Werkheiser's bill.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, am putting my name by House Bill 1028, which deals with notices on a problem with solid waste landfills.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for House Bill 364. It's the first bill under the structured section, last page. If the members will remember, 3 or 4 years ago, we had House Bill 399 regarding the usufructs, in which we had local tax assessors issuing property taxes on possessory interest. There's nowhere in Title 48 that is there. House Bill 399 made it extremely clear that that is not to be taxed. However, it is still being taxed to the point where we've had taxpayers spend in excess of $1 million through the legal system trying to defend it and finally getting broke. This bill does 3 things. It allows the commissioner to review these digests, and if they find that there is illegal properties are illegally appearing on the digest, not subject to taxation under this chapter, that they shall strike it, send it back to the county for resubmission to the commissioner. It provides for appeals on that. It also says that if the property has been found by the commissioner not subject to taxation and it again appears within 5 years, that the commissioner shall notify the Department of Community Affairs, therefore revoking the local government status. We have got a cure in there such that the local government has 6 months to cure the issue. And then the third provision, again, if you've got a property that has been found under the taxation, the commissioner's deemed not taxable and it appears again within a 5-month period, what we're allowing the taxpayer then to do is to do an automatic appeal directly to the Georgia Tax Tribunal so that we can expedite the issue there. That's what this bill does.
Ms. Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to place my name beside House Bill 868 and also 924. Thank you.
Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside House Bill 795 and House Bill 924, the sales tax for goodwill. Thank you.
What was the first one? 7 what?
795.
Ms. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the yellow sheet on page 3, HB 957, we submitted a request yesterday for it to be moved to the blue sheet, but due to a clerical error, it wasn't added. This is part of a group of bills that are seeking to improve processes for kinship caregivers in the state of Georgia. These are grandparents raising grandchildren and others. This bill would simply require that judges and clerks publicly post the availability of indigents affidavits when they are applying for temporary guardianship, which can be a very high cost barrier for families. And that's HB 957 on page 3.
The minority leader is correct. It should have been on the blue sheet today. And so y'all take that into consideration. Ms. Hughley. What? Wait a second.
If I may ask for 2 more bills.
No.
Please.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to put my name beside HB 934, which is also part of the kinship care package. It's on page 2, Representative Kirby's bill. And then I would like to request HB 828 on page 4, Representative Flood's bill, and HB 895, Representative Mayo's bills. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the first page, I'd like to put my name beside HB 54, Representative Waits, HB 497, Representative Stovall, HB 542, Representative Wilkerson. And on page 2, Mr. Chairman, HB 6, Under modified structured rule, Representative Kendrick, and HB 297 on behalf of HB 290 on behalf of Representative Drenner. Thank you.
Mr. C. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, 943, House Bill 943, it's on the third page, halfway up. There is an amendment, Mr. Chairman, AM 292512, that Chairman Willard and I have signed on to perfect the bill.
It's like, I like that perfection. All right, let's get the amendment out here. It's AM 292512. Any opposed to that? It's on. Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following Representative Setzler on House Bill 513 for the film industry, the freedom of speech. It's following Florida's law that was passed last year to help the film industry. That's on the front page on a 513. Also, Mr. Chairman, on the back page, House Bill 471, which allows for a pass-through of ad valorem taxes for rental equipment companies. And also on the back page has to do with ad valorem tax 982. This requires your assessor to, when they're using the income method for assessment of your commercial property, to use your income and expense records instead of those arbitrarily thrown out. It'll help the commercials. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask for the Hope Preservation Act, H.R. 807 and H.B. 677.
Mr. Fleming.
I apologize, I missed one earlier. Mr. Chairman, I looked under the wrong section. On page 3, down near the bottom, House Bill 1017, another modernization bill dealing with electronic discovery issues for our courts. Basically, it gives more power for judges to punish people who try to hide evidence in a case.
I got a question.
Mr. Smith, question.
Mr. Fleming, I have a question. Isn't there already an existing federal rule, and if we implement this one, it will be in conflict, or you'll have two different rules that businesses will have to follow?
Mr. Chairman, you are correct that the Georgia rule that's seeking to be adopted on hiding evidence is a little different than the federal rule. However, there are many instances in our Civil Practice Act and our rules of evidence where we have Georgia distinctions, particularly because our state courts deal with different issues that our federal courts do, one of the biggest being domestic cases, and sometimes the rules need to be a little different. This was a result of about 3-year bar study and a special committee that looked at exactly what you're asking, and the recommendation from the Georgia bar was to have a Georgia rule that was slightly different than the federal rule.
I've been hearing a lot of grief about this particular.
You have. It was a big debate in the bar, and the Georgia Chamber lost there, and they're trying to win here. And basically, though, what it boils down to is you got to decide how tough you want to be on people who try to hide evidence. And the Georgia Chamber doesn't want us to be that tough.
Well, I haven't heard any comments from the chamber. I've heard it from business people in Columbus, so that's where
they're leading the charge and getting them to call you. I've had some calls too, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Smyrie.
Gentlemen, when you explain proportionality when it comes to the national versus the state and how that affects it, because I've been told that that we are in a mirror of the federal law, and now with this new rule coming up, define that for me.
You talking about the proportionality part, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
There is a, used to be when you needed someone's documents in a lawsuit, they were in a file cabinet behind you. It's pretty simple. You copied them. But as you know, nowadays, with computer records, they can tell you where you ate 5 years ago and how much your bill was, because the electronic records are huge. So the volume of records that can be asked for in a lawsuit are so great that the federal courts have adopted what's called a proportionality rule. In other words, is what you're asking for in proportion to what you need. If it's a $10,000 case, can you really make somebody spend $100,000 on getting some records together you need? So Georgia adopts in this a proportionality rule as well. The difference between the Georgia rule and the federal rule, if you're the person not wanting to give the records over because they cost too much, the Georgia rule says you go and ask the court. The federal rule says that if you're the person asking for the rule and you're the person asking for the records and they won't give them to you, you file first. It's a who filed first question, and it goes back to some of the distinctions I talked about with Chairman Smith's questions about Georgia courts handle different cases than the federal courts do, and there's some distinctions there.
It also deals with the importance of the issue at stake as well, from a proportionality perspective, because if the issues at stake there's a correlation as to what the values are as it relates to proportionality.
Exactly. You're correct, Mr. Chairman, and the Georgia rule recognizes that the only difference between it and the federal rule is who has to ask the court first for protection when the question of proportionality comes into play.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Y'all, come on. It's 9:35. We're not going anywhere else with that. Mr. Knight.
Mr. Chairman, one last question, if you will allow it, on that issue.
On that bill?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
To Representative Fleming, has any other states done this, or is this going to be Georgia be the first one to do this?
Many states have procedures whereby these issues are mentioned and addressed. So I do not think we are the first state to do this. No, I don't think we are. We're one of the first to begin to do it. Of course, the federal courts did it just last year, but we would be near the beginning, but not the beginning.
Okay. I got one question for all of you. Did y'all make it through last year without all these bills? Do you think you can make it through another year without these bills? If I wasn't afraid that I might lose my position, we could be done. With that said, if you think you're not going to get a supplemental calendar, you're wrong. We're going to set this thing, and this is Monday's calendar, and I'll just go ahead and apologize. Okay, Monday's calendar, day 30. When we come in and have our rules meetings for supplementals and Mondays, there should be no one on the wall. We'll do resolutions, House resolutions after 30. HB 513, do I hear move? It's on. HB 889. So HB 934. It's on. HB 12. Any opposition? It's on. HB 171. Any opposition? It's on. HB 684. Any opposition? Okay, HB 684, all those in favor signify by raising your hand. 12. All those opposed? That will not be on for failure. HB 699. It's on. HB 727. Any opposition? And there is an amendment floating with that thing. Y'all remember that. It's on HB 734. What a, okay. Okay, any opposed? Got one opposed. HB 779. Any opposed? It's on HB 825. Any opposed? It's on HB 868. Any opposed? It's on HB 976. Any opposed? HB 1060. Any opposed? All those in favor signify by raising your hand. In favor. All those opposed, raise your hand. It carries. It's on. HB 1066. Any opposed? It's on. HB 1070. Any opposed? HB 364 under structured. It's on. HB 471 under structured. Any opposed? It's on. HB 722. Any opposed? It's on. HB 828. Any opposed? It's on. HB 935. Any opposed? It's on. HB 936. Any opposed? It's on. HB 937. It's on. He's been sitting waiting for these, and I've made him hold so we'd have a spot, and I'm a son of a gun. Y'all filled up all the spots. He's going to get them on. HB 990. Any opposed? It's on. HB 1014. Any opposed? It's on. HB 1028. Any opposed? It's on. That's where we're going to start on Monday. You remember that you're starting today and we'll probably get to come back.